Hey everyone, today we are going to take a look at useActionState. This is a new hook from React 19, and we are going to build out this event registration form. This is a form you might see when you're registering for a conference or an event, and we're going to build it using useActionState and a few other new features from React 19. So grab a seat and let's dive into some React code. Here I've got a server component. And this server component is not doing much. It is just rendering this page, which has our registration form. Let's go ahead and pop that open. And here we see the form, but right now it's just a bunch of HTML and Tailwind classes. It is not wired up with any sort of functionality. In fact, if I come over to the form and I fill in my name and I submit it, you'll see that we just submitted the form to this URL. This is a default behavior on forms. It's a GET request with all of the form fields as query params in the URL. We don't want that to happen. We want to save this data to a database whenever the form is submitted. So let's just go ahead and reset the URL here. And then back in our component, we are going to use the new action prop from React 19. With the action prop, we can call a function whenever the form is submitted. And so we are going to call a function called saveAttendee, and we're going to create it as a server function. So in our file tree, right next to our registration form, we are going to create a new file called actions.ts. We are going to mark this module with useServer, and then we are going to export an async function called saveAttendee. We're just going to start this function off by console logging saving attendee. And now back in our registration form, we can import this function. And let's see if this works. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my terminal. And over in the form, let's fill out the form. Just do Ryan, click save. And look at that. We see our console log for saving an attendee. Now we want to go ahead and get all the data out of the form we just submitted so that we can write it to a database. And the first thing you need to know about the action prop is when you submit a form, it is going to pass along the form's data as an argument. Now let's transform that form data into a JavaScript object. So we'll say let data equals object.fromEntries formData.entries, and then we will go ahead and we are going to log that data. And now when we submit our form, do Ryan and build UI, we can see we get a console log. We have a nice JavaScript object that represents all the data from our form. Now we want to take this data and we want to get it in a database. This application has already been set up with Drizzle, and I've got a schema here. Using SQLite, we created an attendees table, and it's a very simple table. We've got name, company, diet in here. So let's go ahead and use Drizzle to get this data object into our database. And we can do that with await DB. We are going to import this from our database connection file. We're going to use insert, and we are going to insert into the attendees table. We'll import that from our schema, and we are going to insert our data object. And then finally, we want to use the returning function. So we can say let result equals this insert statement. All right, let's just make sure this works. Back in the form, we're going to fill it out again. And I'll say Ryan, and I'll only do Ryan here. And I'm going to submit the form. Okay, no errors. I'm going to open up a new terminal here, and I'm going to run Drizzle Studio, which is going to let us see our data. Make this a little bigger. And there we go. We can see the record that we just inserted. Pretty cool. Okay, you may have noticed something when I was submitting the form. The form is resetting. The values are clearing. And we want to get this data that we just inserted out of this server function and back into React. So we're going to go ahead here and we're going to return result 0. And the reason we use this 0 here is result is going to be an array of all the records we inserted when we ran Drizzle's insert command. We know that we're only inserting one record here, so we're just going to pluck out the first object in this array and return it. And I'm just going to kind of clean this up and delete some console logs. And then now I want to use this result in my React app. So I'm going to go back to the registration form. You can see we got a TypeScript error around action here. And when we changed save attendee to return a result, action doesn't like this. Action just wants a void function. It doesn't want it to return anything. So what we're going to do is we are going to just come up here. We're going to create a new function called action. And it's going to be an async function. And inside of action, we are going to await save attendee with form data. And we're going to expect that form data as an argument. And now, instead of calling save attendee, we are going to call action. And since save attendee now returns an attendee, we're going to get that result here. And then we're just going to console log it. So we'll see if we're able to get data from our server function back into the browser. Let's go ahead, open up console here, and just submit Ryan123. And look at that. We see a new record here, ID 2, and all the data that was created from our save attendee function. Now, the form fields are still resetting. They're resetting to blank every time we submit this form. And that's expected behavior because when you use the action prop, every time you run your action and your action successfully completes, React is going to go reset your form, and it's going to reset your form back to your field's default values. And if we look at our inputs here, we can see that we are starting them off with a default value of blank. So name has a default value and company has a default value here of an empty string. So every time we submit our form, we are going to reset the form and clear out these fields. But for today, I don't want to do that. When you submit a form, I want to keep the attendee information rendered in the form. So we need to get this data, this result, back into React state so that we can use it in our form. And this is where useActionState comes in. The name useActionState allows us to take the return value of an action and get it back into the browser's React state so that the browser and client-side React can react to it. All right, so let's do that. We are going to go ahead here and we are going to use ActionState, and this is going to be an import from React. And useActionState is going to give us back three different things. It's going to give us back state, dispatch, and is pending. We'll touch on these in just a second, but we need to provide useActionState with a bit of information. And the first thing we need to give it is an async function. And this async function here is going to take two arguments. The first is called previous, and the next is called payload. And the final thing that we need to provide useActionState with is a default value. And right now we are just going to give it undefined. And this right here is useActionState. And as you can see, there is a lot of API surface area here. You have a couple different return values and then a couple different arguments that you have to pass into useActionState. And rather than just explain these right now, we're going to go ahead and integrate each of these into our form to solve specific problems and kind of build up an understanding of useActionState. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to talk about what happens inside this function that we pass to useActionState. This is where we have a place to run actions and get their value back into state. What is the action we want to run? Well, we want to run save attendee. So I'm going to grab that and I'm going to move it up here. And then I'm just going to return the result. Now, save attendee needs form data. So we need to somehow get our form data out of our action function and into useActionState. And this is where this dispatch function comes in. Dispatch lets you dispatch payloads into useActionState. So we are going to go ahead and we are just going to dispatch our form data into useActionState. So that means that when we dispatch form data, this function inside of useActionState is going to be called, and it is going to be called with the payload, which is whatever we pass into dispatch. So right now, payload is going to be equal to form data. And then down here in save attendee, we're just going to pass that payload through. Okay, let's format this. And we have one more thing we have to deal with. We have to deal with this previous argument. And we're not using that right now. And so just to make TypeScript happy, since we're not using it, I'm going to mark this as an unknown. We're going to keep it as unknown until we need it later. And at that point, we will talk about its type. Our useActionState function here is starting to take shape. And you might be asking, why did we just do all this work? It seems like we just moved a bunch of functions around and we just have more arguments and more names. The whole reason we put everything inside of useActionState is for this state variable right here. If I mouse over state, you're going to see that state is either an attendee object or undefined. And this is a point of useActionState. It lets us run server functions or really any kind of async function. And then whatever we return from useActionState will be available inside of our component. So it takes the return value of an action and gets it back into React state, which means we can now use this state in our form. So we don't want our form to reset to blank default values. Instead, we want to use state.name. Now, state.name can be a string, null, or undefined, and default value really wants a string. So in the null or undefined case, we're just going to make default value an empty string. And so now we are rendering our default value from state. Let's go ahead and let's refresh this page. I'm going to go ahead and close the console here, make it a little smaller. And I'm just going to submit this form again. So I'm going to do name Ryan. And if I save, well, look at that. The form did not reset. Ryan stayed rendered in the name input. And back in Drizzle Studio over here, if I reload, we're going to see a couple more records, but we will see that last record that we just inserted. So pretty cool. We are able to get the state out of our server action and into our component. But one problem with this is there's not a lot of feedback. So if I do Ryan123 and I save, you don't really see that anything happened. So that's where this is pending Boolean from useActionState comes in. This Boolean is going to flip to true whenever we are running our action, whenever we're running the code inside of here. Now let's go ahead and let's use this is pending Boolean inside of our save button. So we'll do something like if we're pending, we'll show a loading spinner. And I think I have Lucid icons here, so we'll use loader2. And let's go ahead, let's make this self-closing first. Let's go ahead and give it a class name of animate spin. So it's got a little animation. And here we're only going to show this if we're pending. So we'll use and let's give this a shot. If we click save, well, we can see a little flash on our save button. I think what's happening here is save is so fast that we don't really give the icon enough time, the loading spinner icon enough time to be seen. Let's go back to our server function here, and we are going to await a new promise, and we'll have this take, I don't know, 1,500 seconds, so 1.5 seconds. And then now, when we save, look at that. We get our loading spinner for about, about 1.5 seconds. Pretty nice. Okay, one more piece of feedback I'd like to add to this form is a toast when the save completes. So let's go back to our form. And inside our action function, I'm using shadcn. And I have this toast function, so I'm just going to import that. And I can pop in a title that says attendee saved, give it a description. We'll do a variant of alert, I think that's what it's called. And finally, we'll do a duration, and we'll say that the toast should stay for 3 seconds. Okay, let's give this a shot. We are going to do Ryan456, and we'll do vegetarian. Click save, we see our spinner, and look at that. We get our toast message letting us know that the attendee was saved. Pretty cool. Now, if you look at our action, there's something kind of interesting going on here. we are dispatching form data, which is going to call our useActionState function. And then we're immediately showing the toast message. And you might be thinking that you don't want to show the toast message until the attendee is actually saved. So maybe we need something like a wait. Throw in a wait in front of this dispatch, and then when that's done, we'll show the toast. But if we do that, we get this error from TypeScript. It says await has no effect on this type of expression. And that's because dispatch is not an async function. You give it a payload and it returns nothing. So there's no point in awaiting it. But if you remember, when I submitted the form, the toast didn't show until after the attendee was saved. Just to kind of drive this point home, let's go back to our action. And instead of waiting for 1500 milliseconds, we're going to wait for 3000. So 3 seconds here. And let's fill out our form, do build UI. And when I click save, you'll notice that there's no toast message. Not until after 3 seconds does a toast message pop in. Not until after this server function runs do we see toast. But that's kind of weird because we didn't await our toast message. Somehow React knew not to show the toast message until the save was complete, which is kind of mind-bendy to think about. The reason for this, the reason that this works and we don't see the toast message until the save completes is because of transitions. And to explain transitions, we first need to talk about this action prop. Any function you pass into action is going to automatically be wrapped in a transition. And what a transition does is a transition is going to wrap a bunch of state updates, and it's going to make sure that all those state updates happen at once. Okay, that was probably a little confusing. If you think about what toast and dispatch are actually doing, they're both providing state updates. When we dispatch, we are expecting this state right here to eventually update with the attendee that we just saved. And with toast, we don't see a state update, but we know it's probably doing something like set is showing toast true somewhere. And that's the thing that causes React to pop up our toast message. So both of these things result in state updates, but they're both grouped together inside of the same transition. We don't see the transition here, but just know anytime you use action, whatever you pass into action is always going to be grouped in a transition or passed to a transition. Okay, so this means that React is not going to show the toast message, is not going to let the toast state update happen until dispatch is finished. You know, toast is like an instant state update. You don't have to wait for it. So you would think it would just immediately show, but dispatch you do have to wait for. It takes time. It takes 3 seconds to run save attendee. And so these things get batched together, which is really cool because we don't have to describe our action in terms of steps. We don't have to say like, save this data, then do this, then show a toast. Instead, we just say what we want to happen and React coordinates all of it behind the scenes for us. Transitions are going to be a theme that's present throughout all of React 19. You're going to encounter them in all these different React 19 APIs, but for action state and the action prop, this is how you think of them. They are going to batch form action state updates together and then let them show in the UI when they're all ready. And again, I think this is really cool. I could talk forever on transitions, but we have a few more problems with our form that we need to fix. So one thing I want to do is we have our attendee in this state variable, and I just want to make sure that we are using it in all of the default values. So let's go ahead and do state.company, otherwise empty string. And here for the diet, we are using this radio group, and the default value is going to be state.diet or none. So we're going to select that none radio button. Okay, let's fill out our form here and make sure all these fields are reset to their correct values. There we go, looking good. Now we have one problem that we need to fix in our form, and that is I just submitted the form with name Ryan. I'm going to submit it with Ryan1, And then I'm going to submit it again with Ryan12. And then now over in Drizzle Studio here, you're going to see that it created 3 new records, Ryan, Ryan1, and Ryan12. Now, I think what I want to happen here is the first time you submit a form, it is going to create a record. It's going to insert a new record into the database. But then any subsequent submissions should just update that existing record, not keep creating new records. So we're going to use useActionState to take care of that for us. Inside of useActionState, we have this previous value, and previous here is going to be the previous state value as you're running your action. So in our case, we know that previous is either going to be an attendee we created, or if we haven't yet created an attendee, it is going to be undefined. Also, I'm not sure if I explained this. This undefined is our initial state. So when we first render this form, we haven't yet created an attendee, and that's why state is either an attendee or undefined. So previous is either going to be undefined or an attendee. And one of the really cool things about using Drizzle is that it can infer types from your database schema. And so we have this attendee type right here. So we are just going to go ahead and import this into our form. And now we have enough information inside of useActionState to decide if we want to create an attendee or update an attendee. So all we have to do is say if previous, we know we're dealing with an attendee we already created. So we will update the attendee. Otherwise, we are going to create the attendee. And I'm just going to define result up here. And we'll do result equals await update attendee. Okay, let's get this update function written. Back in our actions file, we are going to export an async function that updates an attendee. And we need to pass in 2 things to this function. We want to pass in an ID, which is the attendee we're going to update. And we also want to pass in the form data, which has all the form fields for the values we want to update to. And we'll also add a console log here that says like updating the attendee. And just like before, we're going to get our form into data, and then we will use Drizzle to do db.update. We're going to update the attendees table. We're going to set data. We're going to use where here, and we're going to import this equals function from Drizzle, and we're going to say where attendees.id is equal to the ID we passed into the function. And then finally, we want to use returning again. And then here we want to return result 0 because results is going to be an array of all the fields we just updated, but we know we're only ever updating one attendee. Okay, cool. This looks good. Let's go back to our registration form. And this is pretty cool. We've got some errors telling us that update attendee is not a function. Let's go ahead and get that imported. And then now we have some new errors here that are telling us that expected 2 arguments and got 0. We need an ID to update. So what is the ID of the attendee we want to update? Well, this is where that previous argument comes in. We're going to use previous ID, the attendee that we created in the last run of useActionState. And then what value are we going to update it to? Well, we're just going to update it to the current form. So we will pass in payload here. And now we have a way to create an attendee and to update an attendee. And let's go over to Drizzle Studio here. And just to kind of make things easy for us, we are going to delete all records. And then back in our form, we'll give it a reload. Let's add an attendee. So we'll say gluten-free this time. Save. And there we go. Our attendee was saved. We're going to check Drizzle Studio. Here we are. And then now we are going to try to update the name to 123. We're going to click save. If I reload, look at that. We updated the existing attendee. So this is pretty cool. We're no longer just inserting new records every time you submit. You get to submit once, insert a record, and then continuously update it. In fact, we can come over to our form and we can do anything. We can change the company name, change the dietary preferences, save, and we are just going to continue to see those in Drizzle Studio. So this is pretty fun. And you can kind of see useActionState is kind of starting to take shape here, right? It lets you get state into React and then reuse that state on subsequent form submissions so you can know, are you dealing with an attendee that's being created for the first time or one that already exists. Okay, we have two functions here, update attendee and save attendee. And I want to rename save attendee to match the convention. This one is update. This shouldn't be called save. I am going to use VS Code's refactor function to call it create attendee. So we have create attendee and update attendee. Now, one of the really cool things about server components is I just renamed this function to create attendee. I did it using VS Code's refactoring tool, but you'll notice back in our registration form, it automatically updated. It knew I was importing this file, this function from Actions, and it saw that I renamed it. And so it just automatically updated. You know, if you're using something like API endpoints, those are going to be just strings spread throughout your app. And it's not always clear that when you change something in the back end, that the front end needs to be changed. This is just one of those small little quality of life improvements I love about server components and server actions. You can just rename functions and they spread out all over the app. So yeah, I just wanted to show that off. I think it's pretty cool. Okay, we have one more problem with our form, and that is you can see that I've got my attendee information over here, but if I click reload, the form resets and it goes back to an empty state. So right now I want to make it so that if I've already saved an attendee, my form is just going to automatically load the attendee that I've created. So we are going to do that inside of our create attendee function. After you create an attendee, we are going to go ahead and we're going to set a cookie. We're going to use cookies, call it cookies.set, and we're going to set the attendee ID cookie, and we're going to set it to the result of the attendee you just saved. Now, ID is a number, and cookies have to be strings, so we're just going to interpolate this to make TypeScript happy. Now over here, let's open up DevTools. I've got some old data here. Let's just clear everything out. And I'm going to save Ryan, build UI, and vegetarian. And look at that. We get the toast, and then we get a cookie that says we have attendee ID 21. Come over to Drizzle Studio. Boom. There we are. Attendee ID 21. Now, if we reload this page, we still lose all of our data. So when we enter this page, we want to take this value, this 21 value out of a cookie and use it to find our attendee in the database, which means back in our server component where we enter this app, we are going to say let attendee ID equal cookies dot get attendee ID. And then if we have an attendee ID, we can load the attendee. And to do that, we are going to use Drizzle. So we'll say let attendee equals await DB. Get that from our connection. We're going to use db.query, query the attendees table here. And we are going to find the first attendee. And we're going to say the first attendee whose ID equals the value of our cookie. And remember, cookies are strings, so we have to parse in it to turn it back into an integer. Just to see this working, let's console.log loaded attendee, and then we'll just do attendee here. Okay, let's bring up our console, go back to our server, and it's already shown. We already got that live reload, but just to see it in action, we're going to close DevTools, and we'll do a reload, and you can see every time we reload, we are getting this console log. And what are we going to do with our attendee? Well, I think it'd be pretty cool to pass it into our registration form. Here we've got some scoping, lexical scoping issues. So we are just going to say let attendee up here and then assign it if we have an attendee ID. Okay, our registration form is not set up to accept an attendee prop. So now over here, we want registration to accept an attendee. And then attendee is either going to be undefined or a record from the database. And so now we need to use this attendee. when it's passed in, we want to pre-populate all of these form fields with the attendee's value. We also want to do one more thing. We never want to create an attendee. If you pass an attendee in, we always want to make sure we update the attendee. And this is where we can take advantage of this initial state that's passed into useActionState. Instead of passing in undefined, we are going to pass in attendee. So let's save our registration form. Let's also come over here and save our index page. And now let's come over and reload. And look at that. We just pre-populated the form with our attendee information. And let's go ahead and let's make some edits. Add some numbers here, and we'll change to vegan. We'll save. That was a fast update. And let's see, did we update record 21? There we go. Look at that. The name and the company and the dietary preferences all updated. So in this case, when we had a cookie, we didn't even bother going through the create branch in our code. We just are updating the attendee if one's already provided. Let's go ahead. Let's open DevTools again. I know I keep switching with these open and closed, but let's come over here. Let's delete our cookie, reload, empty form, Ryan, say 456, gluten-free. We save. We see our 3-second delay, so we know we're creating an attendee. Over in Drizzle Studio, we see it's created, and let's add a company. And click Save. And there we go. That was a fast update. And so here, again, when we start off with no cookie, useActionState is going to have a default value of undefined when there's no cookie, when there's no attendee. And this time, it did hit that create path. So this is a really cool pattern where you can pre-populate that initial state from useActionState with a record from the database using cookies. So I really like this pattern. I really like this approach, especially when dealing with hooks like useActionState. Okay, we're almost done, but there is one more thing about useActionState that I want to show you. And if you've been watching this code, you might have been thinking, why do we need a new hook to do this? Couldn't we have done everything we've done in this video with this form just using regular old React State and form on submit? Why bother introducing a new hook like useActionState? And the reason for that is that useActionState has automatic queuing built into it. And rather than try to explain to you why, I just want to show it to you. So we are going to come back to our create action. And instead of waiting for 3 seconds, we are going to wait for 30 seconds. Now, back in our registration form, let's go over to the network tab. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and let's just start completely fresh. Let's delete our cookie, reload our form. Okay. And let's look at the network tab. We're going to clear everything. And I'm going to submit the form once. I'm going to do Ryan, and I'm going to do gluten-free. I click save, and there's a network request for that create attendee action. We put that delay of 30 seconds, so this is going to take a long time to complete. And while this network request is going out, I realized I didn't put a company name. I'm going to put build UI, and I'm going to click save again. We're going to wait 30 seconds for our create attendee thing to complete. Something very interesting just happened. We created the attendee, and if we look at the payload, you can see we did a name of Ryan, blank company, gluten-free. And then after the attendee was created, we just sent out an update that did name Ryan, company build UI, diet gluten-free. So in Drizzle Studio, we're going to reload, and we see our attendee here with all the correct information. The really interesting thing that happened is we edited the attendee before it was created. We submitted a form to run an edit request, an update request, before the create ever finished. And if you tried to do that with React State, you React State and on submit, you could do that. It would be really hard because you would have to keep track of all that state. You would have to keep track of, is the attendee created yet? Is the attendee create request in flight? Do I have an attendee to update? Do I have an attendee ID to update yet? With useActionState, we didn't have to add any extra code. Again, just to show it, let's go ahead. Let's clear out our data. We have no attendee here. we are going to do Ryan, no company, no dietary restrictions, save. We can see this is at action. It's going to take 30 seconds. And we can just queue up a whole bunch of updates. So build UI. Let's do another update. Let's update to vegan. Actually, not vegan. Let's do gluten-free. Actually, not gluten-free. Let's do vegetarian. So while the attendee is being created, I just queued up a whole bunch of updates. And you're going to notice something that after 30 seconds, those updates are all going to flush. And then we get one toast message, right? I just updated it like 3 different times, but I only got one toast message. So React took care, it knew it only to show one toast message, not like 4 for each of the updates. And we didn't have to add any extra code. And all of this comes from the queuing behavior inside of useActionState, the ability to read the previous record inside of useActionState. You know, you could imagine expanding this code. Maybe you compare previous to the payload, and if there's no update to be run, you don't send anything to the server. I'm not saying you should do that, but there's just a lot that you can do inside of useActionState. Why you want this queuing behavior, because you can queue up a whole bunch of requests and then run them in sequence, not having to think about, is this async function in flight? Did the data save yet? And so on. So this is useActionState. It's one of the cooler hooks, I think, coming to React 19. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to see me make more forms with useActionState, let me know. One of the things I want to do is, you'll notice in my schema, I have a photo. And you know, this is like a conference registration form. I think it'd be cool to upload a photo using useActionState. So if that's something you're interested in, let me know in the comments below. So until then, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.